Since 1995, over 26,000 international students from all walks of life joined the British Investigators training courses in anomalous phenomena, in ufology, paranormal and supernatural, parapsychological study, anomalous phenomena, science, hypnotherapy, spiritualism, astrology, astronomy, cryptozoology, and many other areas. Our certified self-study courses will teach you how to assess, analyze, engage, formulate, document, and be cognizant of all types of phenomena, suitable for light workers and starseeds, curious personalities and inquisitive minds, skeptics alike and truth seekers. For more information, please visit www.stellaruniversity.com.
This question gets started here. Comes up a lot on the Art Bell show. When I was on the show, I've been on several times, this issue invariably comes up. And it is one of the two centerpiece issues of my book, The Facade. And the title's so deceptive that it even fooled Robert. So you know this is good stuff. But this is one of the questions that I address, and in a more academic form, I wanted to go through it. Now, we're all familiar with the Brookings report. And I'm not going to insult anyone's intelligence by reading this whole thing to them, but I would draw your attention to this line: fundamentalist and anti-science sects are growing apace around the world. And this is in the 60s when this was authored. And toward the end of this quote, if superintelligence is discovered, the results become quite unpredictable. If you're a frequent listener to Art Bell or some of the other shows, you know this is the case, that there are lots of people of conservative religious persuasion. If you're not very conservative in your theology, and what I mean by that is that you take the religious text, the book text upon which your religion is based, in this case, the Torah, the Tanakh, and the Bible as a whole, you take it pretty much at face value. People who do that really have, in many cases, a difficult time embracing the idea of an intelligent extraterrestrial life form. And there's a variety of reasons for that, and I want to go through those reasons today. And I'll prep you by saying this. I only feel that one of them has any substance. The other ones I'm going to basically tell you I think are pretty vacuous. I don't think that it needs to be a concern. But I want to go through all of them nevertheless, historically speaking, why people of faith, who take this perspective on their religious text just really kind of freak out at times over this. And I just don't think it's necessary. Now, there are basically 5 reasons given in Christian writings as to why this idea shakes people in these groups up. The notion of intelligent alien life undoes the doctrine of inerrancy of the Bible. Both Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox, and even many conservative Jews and evangelical or fundamentalist Christians might say this, probably would. The reason is, well, we don't see anything about aliens in the Bible. So if there are aliens, then the Bible must be wrong. That's how the logic goes. The second objection is that the notion of intelligent alien life undoes the doctrines of the incarnation and redemption. Now, C.S. Lewis, who is probably most famous for the Chronicles of Narnia, although he actually did a trilogy that involves the question of alien life, the Paralandra and Life on the Silent Planet and This Hideous Strength, he put framed the problem this way. If the universe is teeming with life, this, we are told, so he's not in this group, but we are told, this reduces to absurdity the Christian claim that to this one planet, God came down and was incarnate for us in our salvation. So some Christians would say, if there are intelligent ETs, then this makes the incarnation just nonsensical. I, of course, am going to say, no, it doesn't. The notion of intelligent alien life, number 3, proves, or at least supports the theory of biological evolution. If you're, pardon the pun, if you've been on another planet, you may not be aware of this. But here on Earth, those who would classify themselves as conservative, theologically speaking, Christians or Jews, by and large, reject the notion of biological evolution. Now, many don't. And I think when this issue gets played out in the popular press, and even in some scholarly literature, there is the misguided opinion that to be a creationist means you believe that, and you can only believe, that God created the earth in 6 literal 24-hour days, and on the 7th day he rested. There are many Christians who take their religion very seriously who do not believe that. And as a text scholar, I can tell you with great confidence that the text is adaptable either way. But nevertheless, there are those who would object to the whole notion of intelligent extraterrestrial life just because it seems to support an evolutionary idea. Number 4, the notion of intelligent ETs would mean that humankind is not unique in the universe, which would mean the Bible is wrong, since only humankind is said to have been created in God's image. Now, this is really more up my alley, and I discussed this in some length in the Facade. The idea that, well, the Bible says we were created in God's image. Humankind was created in the image of God, and that has historically been interpreted as meaning that there's something put into humans that makes them, in terms of in a qualitative sense, unique. And that is usually defined as intelligence. Some people would define it as communication ability, and there are other options. But by and large, if you would actually read theology books, which I highly recommend, if you would do that, you would see the image of God interpreted in some way as intelligence. And so therefore, if we would find an intelligent extraterrestrial being, that, wow, that just kind of blows Genesis out of the water, mankind's not unique anymore, and so we have a big theological problem. And again, my answer is baloney. Yeah. 5, since all angels, and this is the one where most Christians are at, and the one that most are chewing on, and the one I would say is the most substantive. And not necessarily because of theology, although that plays in, but because of the works of Jacques Vallée, John Keel, and a few other people. But this is the biggie. Since all angels, including evil fallen ones, are intelligent, they have free will and are non-terrestrial, or if you want to use the extraterrestrial term, the very search for intelligent alien life may be dangerous. We could be trying to commune with fallen beings. This is where most people in today's evangelical or fundamentalist camp would be, wrestling with this question. That doesn't mean they all conclude the same thing, but that is the question. That's the fundamental question. Now, that last argument works something like this in terms of a syllogism. Angels have free will, are intelligent, or non-terrestrial. ETs have the same. Therefore, angels are really ETs. That is, UFO believers don't think there are angels, which is incorrect. They think the Bible is erroneously identifying ETs as angels. Now, there are several flaws here, but the syllogism, quote unquote, works mechanically. Many Christians do hold to an opinion, and others that spring from it. We'll get to that a little bit below. Now, these premises here, up here, A and B, overlook important differences between descriptions of aliens and alien testimony channeled through abductees or contactees and Judeo-Christian religious texts. And we'll get to some of those differences. It is also apparent from the literature that many UFO believers still believe there are angels. So a lot of people who would, embrace an ET reality don't necessarily merge the two concepts. They believe they are separable. Only those who are Sitchin-esque, there's a new vocab word, in their perspective would necessarily draw the above conclusion, but again, not all the time either. Another syllogistic possibility. Premise A, ETs do nasty things to abductees. I've already seen some t-shirts to that effect. Premise B, the angels who sexually cohabited with women in Genesis 6 were evil. Premise C, the message ETs bring, fostering human evolution, being involved in the crucifixion events, sorry for the hole there, being the ascended intelligence behind the God of Israel or Moses, is anti-biblical. You take all three of those, add to it premise D. The New Testament clearly states that Satan himself can and does, it should appear as a beautiful being of light. His Old Testament name is Hallel ben Shachar, the shining one, son of the dawn, luminous one. Here are some references that talk about Satan being an angel of light. Therefore, ETs, according to all this, are evil. Now again, that mechanically works, and it is the reason why people of Judeo-Christian faith are struggling with this whole idea. Again, they don't all draw the same conclusion, but this is what goes into the thinking. Now, current estimations of the problem, there have been some recent, again, if you are a frequent listener to Coast or other shows like that, there have been some recent studies done to try to bridge the gap between what was written in Brookings, this notion of that if we had intelligent extraterrestrial life, people of faith are just going to roll over and die and crumble, and trying to, through new research, sort of say, well, today's Christians, today's Jews are of a whole different stripe than they were at the time Brookings was written. Okay, now I believe that, but I think that the current research has been overly optimistic on that. And that's another fancy way of saying, yeah, but you still have a lot of people in the Brookings category, and a lot. And I'll show you that could be really significant here. Now, the NIDS report, we're familiar with NIDS, Colm Kelleher, the director there, and Victoria Alexander, get this from their URL. Doug, if you could put the next overhead up there. NIDS has a religious crisis survey, and this is from their website. This is their methodology. They had a 23% return of 230 surveys. Their method was, of course, described here, who they're mailing it to, all these different denominations Figures represented below, 563 surveys. You have Catholic, Protestant, synagogues here. Based upon the closing date figures, the total number of surveys was 230. Here's the breakdown. 130 from Protestant, 86 from Catholic, 10 from synagogues, so on and so forth. Combined, the 230 respondents' answer to this question totals 93,477 families. Of the returnees, 1 in 19 requested a copy of the survey. Now, this figure here will become important a little bit later. The NIDS website goes on to talk about church membership figures. Based on a U.S. population of 280 million, Protestants represent 28%, at 54% of the church membership. Catholics are 20%, Jews 2% of the population, so on and so forth. So what NIDS did was they combined the four religious bodies and said, well, that represents 52% of the U.S. population, which seems like, wow, a lot of people that were touched by this survey, that's like over half of America. Well, some evaluation. Less than 1/4 of the surveys were returned. There's also no way to tell how theologically conservative the individual church leader, synagogue leader, or participant was, which makes a great deal of difference. Several of the questions would have immediately raised suspicions or evoked hostile reactions among religious conservatives. For instance, number 5, about genetic similarities between mankind and advanced ET civilization. 6, if there was an advanced ET civilization and they had religious beliefs fundamentally different from ours, yes or no, it would endanger organized religion. And 10, the extraterrestrial responsibility for producing human life. Now, I guarantee you that if someone who was very conservative in the evangelical camp and absolutely in the fundamentalist camp, they get a questionnaire like this, they're not going to be clicking their heels and go, oh, I can't wait to return this. Oh, this would be wonderful. But the survey itself, there's no way to tell who got the survey and who filled it out. Now, I think mathematically, by the survey's own mathematical calculations and sources, and assuming a family is 4 people, I didn't count the dog here, assuming it's 4 people, 2 children on average, then only 373,908 people are represented by the survey. There's the math. This amounts to a microscopic 0.0026 of the religious bodies polled. In other words, I'm saying that the Alexander report is just a little optimistic. Very few people, in reality, were actually covered by this, of the group that it targeted, and it was a very good idea to target, but methodologically speaking, we're just not quite there. The statements of Mon-signor Balduchi, of course, he has gone on record approving the notion of an extraterrestrial reality in Italian national television, and of course, Whitley Strieber has done some interview work with him, and I think Dr. Greer as well. Balducci provided an analysis of ETs that he feels is consistent with the Catholic Church's understanding of theology, and it is, and it can be, no question about that. Monsignor Balducci emphasizes that ET encounters are not demonic, they are not due to psychological impairment, they are not a case of entity attachment, but these encounters deserve to be studied carefully. He is billed as a demonology expert, and what that probably means, I'm thinking, is that he has done a lot of exorcism work. In terms of the text, though, he seems completely unaware of beings like the Watchers, which is Enoch's term for the sons of God in Genesis 6, whose behavior, and Vallée pointed this out 30 years ago, and others have followed suit, that the events of Genesis 6, all the way up through medieval times, in terms of sexual activity with entities, who are very physical, and the medieval theologians went back and forth over this. I mean, this even gets discussed in Aquinas. This is a very old question. But if you overlay the similarities between those reports and alien abduction syndrome, and I would reference for you the 1992 MIT conference on alien abduction, there was a paper specifically devoted to this, comparisons with alien abduction syndrome and ritual abuse and sexual abuse and sexual activity. There is a lot of overlap, and Balducci seems to be completely unaware of that. Doesn't mean they are the same thing, but it's at least suggestive. Again, this is sort of repeating what I just said. A very large number of evangelical and fundamentalist Christians believe that the Vatican and Catholicism in general is a religion of idolatry. So if you're not a Catholic, if you're a fundamentalist, you don't care what Balducci says. In fact, when Balducci says something, you just go the other way and just say, well, this is where I'm at because he's there. So again, just because the Monsignor comes out and has an affirming response to this really doesn't mean anything with respect to a lot of those who would be in the conservative Jewish or Christian ranks outside of Catholicism. Now, addressing the objections, these are the ones I listed for you, the 5. I'll just give you a few comments on each. This whole thing about undoing biblical inerrancy, this objection lacks weight because the Bible issues no statement declaring that there isn't life elsewhere. I mean, there's no verse that says, oh, and by the way, just wanted to let you know, closing comments at the sixth day, that I didn't do anything anywhere else. Okay, there's nothing like that. And again, this one goes all the way back to Aristotle, when Aristotle and his fellow philosophers were discussing the old question of, are there other worlds? This is the ancient Greeks, and the medieval theologians, the scholastics and other stripes, of course, picking up on where Aristotle was and some of the Greek philosophers, they picked up these debates. This is a very old debate, and none of these guys came up with the idea or the notion that there is something actually in the Bible that rules this out. The question was a little different. What are the range of possibilities given the open door? That's really where they were at. But today we seem to get this idea that, the only things that are true are the things that are actually in the Bible. Well, the Bible doesn't talk about buses. So there's just a logical disconnect there that I think people need to understand. The notion that intelligent alien life undoes the incarnation and redemption, this one comes up a lot. In fact, the Christian Reformed Church, which is centered in Grand Rapids, Michigan, last year, maybe a little longer than last year, in their denominational publication on the front page, had an article called Redeeming the Extraterrestrial. And their frustration with the ET question focused on this. Well, if there are ETs, did Jesus die for them? Again, that's just beyond the scope of the New Testament. It's an irrelevant question, but people think that it is because that, if we have the incarnation that covers redemption, and it's more than just redeeming souls, it's redeeming the whole creation. In the book of Colossians, it has this language that the incarnation and redemption covers the whole creation. Then the question is, well, can ETs go to heaven? Do they need to or can believe in Jesus as their Savior? And again, the question isn't specifically addressed. Jesus, as the incarnated Son of God, according to the New Testament, I'm not going to put these verses up here for sake of time, but he is easily, very transparently described in the New Testament as being far beyond anything else that's created. And in fact, the claim is given for Jesus that he is pre-existent. He had no beginning. And I know you're thinking, if you're familiar with Christian religion, well, what about this only begotten stuff? To be begotten, you had to start somewhere. Actually, that's a very poor translation of the word, even though we're familiar with it, and it's probably due to the King James. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, and maybe in the context of this week's events, the historic conflict between Arab and Jew, you might have heard of or might recall the Isaac-Ishmael story, where God comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, I know you're really old, your wife's really old, but you're going to have a child. I'm going to promise you this. You're 100, she's 90. Go ahead, try to get pregnant, and you're going to have a child. Now, the way the story works out, they get impatient. I mean, wouldn't you? Sarah comes to Abraham and says, this just isn't working. And she says, I have a better idea. Why don't you take my handmaiden, Hagar, and you have sex with her, and it'll still be your kid, and there we go. And rather than recoiling in horror, Abraham goes, hey, wow, why didn't I think of that? So he does that, and the child, according to the Torah and according to the Quran, is Ishmael. Okay, Ishmael is the geographical and genetic father of the Arab race, which Arabs and Muslims are different. One is ethnic, the other one is religious. But they live in the area. They eventually live in the area where Islam gets started. And God comes to Abraham after Ishmael's born and says, now, what about the covenant wasn't clear? Okay, this is Sarah. You're you, I still presume. What about this was fuzzy? This isn't what I intended. So then he has Abraham go into his wife Sarah, and they have Isaac, the forerunner of the Jewish race. Now here's the issue. Isaac is the son of the promise, the intended son, but he's the second born. Ishmael, by right of, this is Middle Eastern primogeniture, Ishmael, by right of firstborn, logically should inherit everything. And of course, the Arabs, and when they become Muslims, know this. And this is the stance in the Quran. It's our land because he's the firstborn. Firstborn. Was, and the New Testament actually uses this example. It refers to Isaac as the firstborn, the first begotten. Question, was Isaac Abraham's only child? No, he had Ishmael. So when Jesus is spoken of in terms of being the firstborn, it does not necessarily denote okay, some kind of biological or physical offspring bringing into being. What it refers to as a special status. He is the elect, the special son of God. Isaac was the special son of Abraham. So this whole idea that it undermines the incarnation just doesn't hold water. Jesus is Jesus in the New Testament, and this whole question doesn't have anything to do with it. Now, on the notion that intelligent life supports or proves evolution, again, many Christians and Jews have ideas, specifically theistic evolution. There are things called progressive creationism, old earth creationism, for instance, following Stephen Jay Gould's punctuated equilibrium, kind of Christianizing that. There are a lot of Christians who aren't in this camp and would accept some form of evolution, so I think that undermines the objection. In fact, Hugh Ross is probably a main proponent of old earth creationism. He's a PhD astronomer, was a research fellow at Caltech, very serious Christian. And he accepts the idea that the earth and the universe are billions of years old and isn't troubled at all by the question. Now, panspermia comes up because of the idea of alien life either being accidentally or deliberately seeded from space. And Ross, in one of his books, he has several books, Creator and the Cosmos, says that basically the whole meteorite scenario could have happened in the reverse. That a meteor, and we know this happened, struck Earth, and it could have blown life forms off Earth that wound up elsewhere, as opposed to Mars coming to Earth. I mean, the reverse scenario could be true, but Ross is eventually going to say, well, who really cares? But this doesn't need to threaten anybody's faith. But again, he's a more modern thinker here. It also doesn't answer the question of where the ETs came from. Borrowing from Aristotle, the ETs would not be the unmoved movers. And I don't know many people in ufology that even claim that. So I think this is just an argument from religious perspective that, again, lacks weight. On the notion that intelligent ETs would overturn humanity's uniqueness as being in the image of God, again, this is more or less where I'm at, where my work is at. I don't think the image of God is something but in people. We'll cut to the chase here. Why? No matter how you define it, communication ability, possession of a spirit or soul, conscience, free will, intelligence, all those things are shared to some degree with the animal world. Again, it's not necessarily that they have to match us, but they're not unique to humanity. Even this, spirit or soul, Genesis 1 clearly says that animals have a nephesh, which is what gets translated soul in Hebrew, like in the English Bibles. They have a nephesh. All the word means is it's the life principle. It's that which animates a being or a form, a physical form. And animals share that. Soul and spirit are used interchangeably in the Old Testament, so I think you could easily argue that animals have spirits to it. I think this is the wrong way to look at it. I think the best way to look at it is that the image has to have these three things. It has to make mankind certifiably unique. Every person has to have it to the same extent, actually, and not potentially, either have it or you don't. And it's something shared with God's own being. Here's the Hebrew. In the image, the noun for image is tselem, prefixed by the preposition be, bet, the Hebrew letter bet. Thus the phrase is bet selem. God created mankind, humankind, bet selem, okay, in the image of God. Now, as in English, the word in doesn't always mean the same thing. And I don't want to sound like our former president here, but have you ever now you know what linguists do, okay? I am married, by the way. It might surprise some of you. But have you ever wondered what the word in means? Okay, here you got some options. Put the dishes in the sink. That's location, written in pencil. That's the instrument you use. We're alike in some respects. Limitation, not every respect, but some. I want membership in the club, speaks to inclusion. He broke the statue in pieces, speaks of a result. Here's what you say in reply, denotes purpose. But which one is in the image? I think it's this one. There's a special use of bet, the preposition. Several Hebrew grammarians believe is the point of the author in Genesis 1:26 and 27, and I agree. Meaning of functioning in the capacity of. Usually English translates society with one word, as. And if we did that, if we put be, or bet, on conference organizer or editor, you would translate, I served as conference organizer. I worked as an editor. And so I think we should translate the whole idea of image is that we are created as God's image. In other words, to image God, to be his representative. I think that's all it means. It is a possessed, as though the image is some quality or ability, a possessed attribute. That is not the point. It's functional, what we do, as opposed to something we have. But we are created as God's image. Go ahead and switch the overhead. Now, what that means, in respect to the question, is that while all humans are uniquely God's imagers on earth, this status applies only to humans, not to any other created thing, and it's specifically to earth. Therefore, there's no need to theologically resist the idea of intelligent ETs on the basis of the divine image. Who cares? We, humanity, has been given a special status here. We're to run things in God's stead. This is why, and the issue of capital punishment has come up. I'm not going to get into a political or even a theological debate over that issue, but the Old Testament is very strict. Whoever kills an innocent person, by man will his blood be shed, because, Genesis 9:6, in the image of God made he man. When you kill a human being, an innocent human being, it is as though you are killing God in effigy. That is why it was so offensive. God took it personally. Okay, that is why the rationale behind the whole capital punishment debate from a religious perspective. And I think that fits in very well with the whole idea that we are created as representatives. We all have varying abilities. If the image was intelligence, what? If you're smarter, you have more of it. If you're less, if you have Alzheimer's, do you lose it? I mean, all these really questions that people don't think through, because theologians have perpetuated what I think is a mythical idea, a mythical definition of the image. And I think this really takes this argument away and allows for there to be no worry if there are intelligent ETs. Now here's the biggie. ETs are fallen angelic beings and therefore evil. Okay, again, this is, I think, is the most substantive objection, the one that gets discussed most. What is needed at this point, however, is to definitely separate the beings to which contactees and abductees testify and the sons of God in the Old Testament and ancient Jewish text. If you can separate what people are experiencing and what people, either through abductions or contact, if you can separate them from the records and religious texts of beings coming down, essentially having their way with human women and producing strange offspring. If you can put those into separable categories, then there is no problem in terms of a religious person, and you could, as you converse with some, or you are one yourself, there's no inherent problem with embracing the idea of an intelligent extraterrestrial life form if those are separable categories. If they're not, then the question just transforms. It becomes a whole different issue. So can ETs be identified with angels at all, especially good ones, and so separated? There are 4 problems with that. Again, these are difficulties that you'd have to think through. Jewish and Christian texts clearly teach that angels are immortal and do not have determined lifespans. That's just one verse of about 5 or 6 I could list. Mortality would be required of ETs if there are indeed bodies. You got a body, you don't have an immortal being. Just, kind of goes together. Angels, Hebrew malachim, are always depicted in human form. There are no malach, and Hebrew vocabulary is very specific. There are specific words to describe different beings of what scholars call the heavenly hierarchy. At different levels, if you're this, you belong there. If you're this, you belong over there. It's a bureaucracy. It's a divine bureaucracy. Angels, malachim, are always depicted in human form, never non-human. The creatures of Isaiah 6, so the great throne room passage, and Ezekiel 1 and 10, the Merkava vision there, the flying whatever it was in Ezekiel 1, these are seraphim and cheruvim. You'll notice they're not the same word. They're different creatures altogether. In terms of ET literature, only the Nordics really resemble the way angels are described in the Bible and ancient Jewish religious texts. Third problem, angels are never said to need flying craft to get from one place to another. They are truly extra-dimensional beings. And again, this idea is common in discussions of aliens and UFOs, so it's not something totally foreign. You only need craft, the operative word there is need, and speeds approaching light speed if you need to travel great distances. If we're dealing with a dimensional reality, you don't need them. Then the question becomes, well, why are they there? Maybe that does separate the 2 groups. I'm going to skip this note on the Merkava vision of Ezekiel 1. I think that whatever this was, I do not think it was what we commonly see today in pictures or descriptions as a UFO. It was real, though. I do believe it was physical form, and we can talk about that maybe if we have questions and answers. I have a whole set of overheads where all the elements of the description in Ezekiel 1 can be found in existing iconography, sculpture, pictures of Ezekiel's day. And if you look at how they drew what Ezekiel described, you don't come out with some kind of Apollo 11 kind of thing or something. It's just totally different. And so I think Ezekiel should be understood in light of its own people. Okay, in light of the ancient people that lived at the time. D, if ETs were to be misidentified in New Testament texts, or if angels were to be misidentified with ETs, then logic would compel us to accept whatever else the New Testament says about angels. Now, if you're going to make this equation, and you can tell I don't, that angels are ETs and ETs are angels, then logic compels you, if you're going to do that, to agree with these things as well. It's methodologically inconsistent to accept the equation and then turn around and reject New Testament testimony regarding angels in other respects. Here are some things angels do. Now, I doubt if a lot of us would want to embrace these ideas in this context. Angels or ETs gather only the followers of Christ at the rapture. Angels or ETs announce that Jesus was in fact the Messiah. I mean, if you're Jewish, you just don't want to hear that. Angels or ETs are inferior to and subject to Jesus Christ. Angels or ETs carry out the wrath of God. Ooh, there's a nasty one. On the earth and unbelieving humanity at the time of the apocalypse. I tend to think that the whole apocalyptic subject, this is a sidebar, when it relates to Jesus and the angels, gets soft-pedaled. I'll make a theological statement here. When Jesus returns, he is not going to come back throwing kisses and tossing daisies. Okay? You read the description of the book of Revelation and then go back to the Old Testament and look at the description of God as a warrior. It is very violent. It is unmistakably bloody. So if you're going to take the coming of extraterrestrials in concert with these ideas, you better know what other points of the analogy you need to deal with. And that may cause you to rethink it and maybe try to separate the two groups. Now, if they can't be successfully segregated, then you got two positions, and this is where most conservative Christians and Jews are. Angels and ETs are completely different entities, but both exist, or there are no genuine interplanetary ETs, only angels, good and evil. Those are your two options. This is the question which most religious conservatives would come, given the above, and even given their willingness to embrace an ET reality completely. In this regard, the main touch point in my mind between fallen angelic beings and today's ET phenomenon is the sexual element of abductions. Now, I know David Jacobs, who teaches at Temple, and he's a good scholar, respect his work. You know, if I've heard him once, I've heard him 10 times say, well, this is a recent phenomenon. The abductions are a recent phenomenon. It's like J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée never lived and wrote. I mean, 30 years ago, they were producing whole volumes, cataloging the similarities. I mean, did that just disappear? I mean, you have to take that evidence into consideration when you're trying to flesh out a view of this. And so I think this is the area that needs the most work. This is the area that needs the most thought. If a theological conservative Christian or Jew divorces ETs and fallen angelic beings, then they could embrace an ET reality. And this is what you need to, when you get people who reject to the belief in intelligent alien life on religious reasons, you need to point this out. I mean, that this is really the only issue, and you need to think about all these other things we've talked about. If you can divorce the two, then what's the problem? But again, that begs the question, can you divorce the two? And like I said, that's where the work needs to be done. On the other hand, sexual activity from both data pools, that is the religious text and the ufological literature, you know, works like Jacob's book, The Threat, and Vallée and John Keel. Where are we at here? Doug, you? Okay. The last sentence, right here. Okay. On the other hand, sexual activity from both data pools has clear precedent in ancient texts for an evil presence and agenda. This is a more substantive, emotional, intellectual, and theological battleground. Here it is in the form of a question. Does the evidence presented to us on both sides, abduct testimony and ancient texts, does that evidence argue for a separation of the aliens from the Watchers or the sons of God in Genesis 6, or an equation with them? That is the issue. When it comes to, again, conservative Christianity or Judaism, that is the issue. And so be prepared when you interact with friends, neighbors, whatever, who come from this perspective that you have got to address this issue. Now, that's all I have. I don't know if we have time for questions. I was told to leave time for questions. I have no idea what time it is. I don't have a watch. What time is it? Oh, I wasn't too bad. 5 after 11. So is Robert here? If he wants me to stay here, I'll take questions. If we want to move, we can do that too. Okay, we're told we can take a couple questions. Anybody have a question? Going once. Going, okay, in the back, you're going to have to, okay, the website is www.facadenovel.com, FACADENOVEL.com. And I have everything I'm doing in terms of overheads in this session and the next one is going to be available to you free. I mean, you could go up to the website and get some of it, but I'd rather just email it to you. So that my email address is on the website. You could just put Michael S. Heiser, and that's, we know how to spell Michael, S in the middle, Heiser @yahoo.com. You can reference it through the website. Yes, sir.
The fishtail, split.
Mhm.
For instance, my daughter had to be about language similarities between Hebrew, such as is laid out between Greek.
Okay, the question was, are there language similarities between Hebrew and Arabic? And then a comment about Sitchin's comments on similarities between Hebrew and Greek. Hebrew and Arabic are both Semitic languages. They come from the same language family. Hebrew is testified a bit earlier, but in terms of the actual structure of the vocabulary, there is a lot of overlap. Now, just like with any, English has a lot of overlap with Latin and Greek. We're very cosmopolitan in our language formation. So just because there are similarities doesn't deny that there are differences as well. Hebrew and Greek are entirely different language groups. Hebrew is Semitic, Greek is Indo-European. However, the Greek alphabet was taken from the ancient Semitic world, specifically Phoenicia. The Phoenician alphabet was adopted by the Hebrews and it was eventually also adopted by the Greeks. But then they dropped certain letters and added other ones. So even the alphabet itself is different, but the characters start out the same. So there is some similarity there too.
I'm reading a book, Native American stuff, teachings of the star ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Native American beliefs.
A question about, do I have any information on Native American beliefs, the star ancestors? I don't know a whole lot about Native American beliefs other than to say this in the context of your question. You basically have the same story, almost without exception, across the world civilizations of, the terminology would be star ancestors, coming down and having some kind of sexual relationship with women, either if it's violent or nonviolent or whatever. The story is the same. Now, that branches out to something we may address in the next session. The sons of God are called the Watchers in non-biblical Jewish texts. But the word watcher does occur in the Hebrew Bible as well. The Watchers are described as reptilian. Okay, there are Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically 4Q Amram, it's also called the Testament of Amram, that describes Watchers as reptilian. That is an image that is also transcultural, from Sumer, Mesopotamia, Native America, Mesoamerica. And so I'm of the opinion that this suggests, it doesn't solve the question, whether we're dealing with an evil entity or not. I think it's suggestive that is the case, but it's not conclusive. But it does tie in the reptilian element with what I call and what I articulate in the book as the Watcher paradigm for understanding all this. Follow up.
There's some too. If you look, I know it sounds crazy, but if you look at like a bug or an insect, at their actual face, like a praying mantis, they actually have a look of an alien.
Yeah, he's commenting about visual similarities between insects and the way alien life forms are described. Visually that certainly is the case. Whether that means something in terms of genetic is an entirely different question. But the observation is taken. Anybody? Okay, in the back. Right? Yeah, you.
I'm wondering if your last name is this a coincidence? Because Heiser in Hebrew is what they call an extraterrestrial.
No, I didn't know that. Maybe it is. Yeah, all I do is ancient. I don't speak modern, but that's fascinating. Okay, right here.
Do they have the same interpretation of reptilian for the ancient Sumerian texts?
Okay, this is my I'm gonna end with your question. This is my teaser. I have an overhead in the next presentation entitled "What Zechariah Sitchin Won't Tell You About the Anunnaki." The short answer to your question is yes. Okay, the short answer is yes. The question was, is there a connection between this reptilian appearance and Sumerian stuff? Now, in terms of a text, no text that says the Anunnaki look like reptilians. In the sculpture, though, that is very apparent. Okay. Now, the question is, what does that mean? Okay, Robert, you're here. We're ready to. Whenever you're ready to wrap up. What time is it? Okay. I'm supposed to keep. I'm just obeying. All right. Is there another question? What was that?
What it means.
One of
what it means. Stop right on the.
Well, I want you to come to my session. Now, if you can't come, then I'm gonna do the same thing we did in here. I'm gonna pass around the list to get the overheads, and I'll certainly send them to you. And if you go to the website, you could email me and say, hey, I was at the Bay Area Expo. Can you send me the Sitchin stuff? And I'll do that. So if you can't come, that's all right.